Dear brown girl like me. There are lots of reasons behind why I decided to write this book. To challenge the existing portrayals of brown women, to tackle erasure, to share some of our stories, to heal. But ultimately, I was writing down all the things that I wish I could have told my younger self. So here I am, reaching my hand out to that teenage girl crying on the bathroom floor.
Hi, welcome. I'm Suman Butcher, and this morning I'm talking to Jaspreet Kaur, spoken word artist and author of a new book, Brown Girl Like Me. Welcome to Asian Culture Vulture, Jaspreet.
Thank you, Suman. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So I've been reading different chapters of your book. There's a hell of a lot in there, and we can talk about some of the things in a minute. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to just ask you, this may sound like a prosaic question, but what is your personal background in terms of, your own life as a young woman who's born and brought up in London?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I was born and raised here in East London. I'm a proud East Londoner. But in terms of my background, I'm a Punjabi Sikh woman. My parents migrated from Punjab during the 60s. Mum came a little bit later on in the late 70s. So we really kind of set our foundation, set our roots in East London. And growing up, I at first felt very close to my culture, my identity, my faith, everything that makes me a brown woman.
They call me her. They call me Jazz. That's not my name. That's not my name. That's not my name. That's not my name. When you say my name, say it whole for me. Because I'm tired of only being half of me so that the other kids wouldn't laugh at me. It's easier for you to pronounce, but the sounds are no longer mine. And the meaning is becoming more difficult to define. I'm renamed. Maybe it's me who's being too lenient. I folded up my name into a small box that will roll off your tongue to be more convenient, until my syllables are simply fragments of East versus West. Is this me at my best, if I'm only half of me? That's not my name.
There was this feeling that Asian women weren't being recognized for all of their contributions in society. And I remember growing up feeling like I just didn't see Asian women anywhere. I didn't see them on TV screens, in movies, in books, in literature, definitely not on our national curriculum within schools, except for some of those kind of infamous examples like Mira Siao and the Goodness Gracious Me team and Bend It Like Beckham. There just wasn't much other representation out there for us young brown girls. And then growing up and also recognizing that there was a lot of labels, a lot of assumptions, a lot of misconceptions about who brown women were. And always feeling like when we did see Asian women, especially in kind of mainstream media in the white Western world, they would always be conveyed as victims, as docile, as submissive, as weak, as lacking autonomy. And I felt like it just wasn't showing the full picture of all the amazing things about Asian women, our achievements, how we've made it through hardships, and all those incredible inspirational stories too. So I spent a lot of time kind of looking at whether there were other books out there for Asian women, a toolkit, a non-fiction book in this way that kind of navigates all these intersectional parts of our identity. And the last book like this, the last book that's a non-fiction about the collective stories of South Asian women, was written back in the late 70s by an amazing woman called Amrit Wilson, who's an activist and writer. There does feel like a little sense of, more of a sense of urgency for this feeling of having role models and people to look up to. And I guess I'm a big believer in, you've got to see it to believe it. You've got to see people in these certain positions, in different fields, in these different spaces to feel like it's possible. And I feel for a long time we haven't been seeing much of that. So I think you're absolutely right, because there is now more of us. I think there is this kind of more of this sense of urgency of having this representation out there. There are 10 chapters covering very different themes, very different concepts, everything from mental health to love and relationships to social media and microaggressions. There's a lot happening in this book. And I think that's the point. I wanted to touch on each of these kind of significant issues by doing this research over the last 6-7 years about what are the main concerns for South Asian women here in the UK. And they seem like the main 10 themes. And you're right, I've touched on each of them. And what I'm hoping is from this book is that we start to see more literature coming from it, more research going into these topics. If anything, there could have been an entire book on each individual topic and each individual chapter. So I think you're absolutely right that there are a lot of themes, there are a lot of topics tackled in this book, but I feel like this is just the beginning. And what I'm hoping is this inspires more research and more writing, more literature coming from it. But in terms of who it's aimed at, I think predominantly, yes, it's aimed at South Asian women and girls as this kind of guidebook on navigating all these different parts of our lives. But it's absolutely for the rest of the communities out there as well. I'm thinking people who have an interest in feminism, those that have an interest in culture and understanding other cultural experiences and perspectives. I definitely think it's something that the white community, white men, white women can be reading so that they can be better allies to women of color.
Does it speak across generations? So, I'm a lot older than you are, but when the first thing I read about the Sunday morning coconut oil experience, I've totally had that in that sense, So, is it aimed at a certain generation, or are you reflecting experiences that across different generations, like the first migrants, i.e. the 40 years ago, the book that Amrit Wilson wrote about finding a voice, and now brown girl like me, are we talking to each other, or are these just two like parallel stories, if you like?
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely talking to each other. And I think having that intergenerational lens was incredibly important to me when I was conducting the research and finding the women to interview, that I didn't want it to just be a millennial Gen Z perspective, even though that is kind of the group that I would fit into. I did want it to reflect the stories and experiences of my mum's generation, my grandmom's generation. So you'll find in the book that there are interviews and nuggets of wisdom from women in their 70s, 80s and 90s, because I feel often when we're talking about some of these issues and these topics, different generations often pitted against each other, the younger generation pitted against the older generation. And I really want to kind of stop that narrative from happening, because I think for our communities to progress and live happier and healthier lives, we do need these intergenerational conversations and to see what we can learn from one another. What can we be learning from older generations, and what could the older generations be learning from some of the younger ones? So that's absolutely something that's incredibly important to me in this book, these intergenerational conversations.
I read that you used to teach in a school somewhere. Do you want to tell me a bit about your work as a teacher, but you've kind of moved away from that, right?
Well, I've moved away from the classroom in terms of the formal classroom of teaching, but I'm definitely teaching in lots of new and exciting ways now. Obviously, as a young female teacher, there's a lot of things that you have to consider when you enter the classroom about how you're going to carry yourself, how the tone that you have in the classroom, the environment you want to create. And also as a history teacher, I was teaching a curriculum that sadly is still not as inclusive and as diverse as I wish it could be. So a lot of it was up to the teachers themselves to bring in some of this diversity into the classroom. So if I was teaching certain topics about the First World War or the Second World War, I'd bring in the reality of the Black and Asian people that contributed in the First and Second World War in ways that the curriculum perhaps wasn't conveying. So I learned a lot during that time. And I think that's reflected in the book about my role as a teacher, what I saw on the ground, issues with the curriculum, things that we can improve within the education system is definitely what comes up quite strongly in the second chapter of the book, entitled Beyond the Classroom.
There's other conversations about trying to teach the history of empire and colonialism. Where do you sit with that, generally speaking?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work in this space, and I know this conversation about teaching empire and decolonizing the curriculum has been a really hot topic over the last few years. But I think, as most historians will agree, it's just about teaching the realities of what empire was, and that is not just showing the glorified side of how Britain loves to teach about empire, but also including the atrocities, the famine, the poverty, the devastation that was also caused by this empire. And I absolutely agree that that does need to be added into the curriculum so that we do have this kind of fuller picture, this fuller narrative.
So to come back to Brown Girl Like Me, as I asked you earlier, like, you know, who do you see as your audience? And if a lot of the audience is, let's say, young Asian women, what would be your kind of, I want to say message, but it sounds inaccurate because the book is there. But if there was something that they could hold on to from it, you know, what would you say that would be? What would you like them to receive from your book?
I guess the main kind of message of this book is to find this sense of healing that I know that a lot of Asian women have been trying to find in lots of different ways. But ultimately, this book is showing that I want young brown women to feel proud of who they are, to be proud of their identity and all the good, the bad, the ugly that comes with it. And I think for so long, white Western feminism has been telling Asian women that if they want to live independent, free, successful lives, that they need to come closer to whiteness to do that. But what this book is saying is that, no, you can absolutely hold your culture and your faith and all those things that you might hold dear to you as a brown woman close to you, and also live very fulfilled, successful lives. And I think that's one of the key messages, that you can just be who you are and love who that person is without having to strip away parts of your identity. I think that's a really key message in this book.
Jaspreet Kaur, thank you very much for talking to Asian Culture Vulture, and we wish you all success for your book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What made being a young brown girl so difficult was the constant messaging that my heritage, who I was and am, was less desirable, fashionable, or even legitimate than white Western culture. Eventually, I found myself wanting to deny my own heritage because I was told by society that it had no place here. And with that loss of identity came a lack of self-confidence and self-belief, culminating in me almost losing my entire sense of self. I found myself thinking, where and how do I fit in? I wanted to be white, but I kept thinking, what am I up against? Eventually, I had a realization. Do I even need to fit in?